Tom, how, if at all, has the court system been altered or changed as a result of the COVID pandemic?
That's a great question. It's changed in a number of ways. Initially, when the pandemic took effect, the courthouse was essentially shut down, and we were doing no jury trials, and that includes the criminal courts. So we had defendants who were in custody, in some cases awaiting trial, who could not get their day in court. As a result of that, the Supreme Court suspended what we refer to as the Speedy Trial Act on a temporary basis as a result of this medical emergency. The judges and the lawyers were still able to work on cases through Zoom, which we're all familiar with now. If you asked me what Zoom was 5 years ago, I would have had no idea, but I've become pretty adept at using it. Initially, we were doing case management. Trial judges such as myself, since we couldn't do jury trials, we assisted the motion judges. I had a number of cases, dozens of cases we assigned to me for active case management, which we would conduct by Zoom. When the courts reopened, the priority of available jurors went naturally to criminal defendants. People, again, those in custody who had a right to a speedy trial that had been suspended, so we were anxious to get them going. So the available jurors of the jury pool went to the criminal case. So I believe Judge Art Hill is the one who tried the first criminal jury trial in Cook County.
Is that about a year into the pandemic that they started slowing the...
Yes, I think the courthouse shut down essentially at the initial, it was March of 2020, and I think Judge Hill did the first criminal case in February or March of 2021. In May, the first week of May, Judge Flannery, my presiding judge, the presiding judge of the Law Division, did the first civil jury in the Law Division. And that was in May of 2021, and then I actually was lucky enough to do the second one in May. And we did that much differently. Instead of using my courtroom, I went down to 2005, which had been specially outfitted with a lot of spacing.
That's what I wanted to ask you. What precautions were taken to leave the shutdown portion of the court system to gradually trying to open up in a prudent and safe way for prospective jurors and counsel and clients?
Well, the way we did it in the Law Division is Judge Flannery, and with the assistance of the Chief Judge and the Office of the Building, had 2005, which, as you know, Al, is that very large. Typically, it's an assignment room. It was set up with specially spaced seats for jurors to sit in. The day before jury selection was supposed to commence, instead of having, like we've done in the past, they'd send out all the summonses for every day, they would send out specific ones targeting jurors for a specific case, knowing they were and they had to send out more summonses initially. The yield was not as robust as it was.
People were afraid to respond to the summons initially, weren't they?
Right. So a lot more summonses went out and than the people who would actually show up. And the jury assembly room, which is usually, it's a large room.
We call it Yankee Stadium.
Yeah, the half of the jurors, potential jurors, would be in one side, and then the ones we would question. So we would actually do the voir dire and the questioning of jurors in the jury assembly room. Half the room would have the people waiting in the wings, and the other half would be seated with social distancing. Was very, and it took some work to figure out exactly what we need for court reporters, counsel, and where to step outside of the room to do the peremptory strikes or motions for cause.
Pre-pandemic, you'd send down for 40 or 50 jurors who would all sit shoulder to shoulder in the back of the courtroom until their number was called to sit in the box to be interrogated.
Right, and it was nothing like that. And initially, each potential juror was provided with a kit, which included hand sanitizer, a clear face mask, and they were given those face masks. That way they would keep the face mask on, but the attorneys were able to see their expressions and so forth when they're responding to questions. And they all had hand sanitizer, and these were theirs to keep. So after doing several of those, and initially we would do one jury at a time because of the spacing and the building, the capacity. It evolved from that to where we were able to do several juries at a time. But for instance, in my courtroom, I would use an empty courtroom down the hall, where another judge may be doing his or her call by Zoom. I would use that as the jury room, and I would and depending upon the size of the courtroom and the spacing, you had a limited number of people permitted in the courtroom. And I would have to count up the attorneys, the clients who were going to be there, the clerk, the deputy, court reporter, and then how many spaces do we have left for the jurors, and which became a more cumbersome process because by definition I would have to go through my opening statement with each group as they came in and do the introduction of the attorneys.
So what time period were we talking at this point, Judge Lyons? If you say the first maiden voyage was in August of 21,
May, yeah.
And then August, I thought you said.
I think it was around August because there were one jury set per week from May through most of the summer. And it was probably, I think you're right, Al, I think it was about August roughly when they expanded the number, and a lot of it had to do with what the building would permit. And
they only let 4 in an elevator at a time, I believe,
right,
for a while.
they had to be, right, and there were actually spaces. If you remember the old Twister game, there were little,
in the footprints.
Yellow balls or dots that the people would stand on. And then so I think it was probably August when I would have, so if I called for 36 jurors, I might only be able to begin with 14. And what I did in my courtroom, I would have them sit in every other seat in the jury. My jury box holds, in my courtroom, 14 people, but they'd sit every other seat, and then I'd have 4 extra chairs in the front. So we'd have 12, and we would question those 12. The other jurors in the veneer would not have the ability to listen. They'd be in another courtroom. And
so at that point in time, you said might be several jury trials going on in the courthouse
Correct.
At a time in the Daly Center.
Correct.
About the criminal courts building, about the same?
I think I mean, I don't have firsthand knowledge, but from what I understand, it was the same thing, and they may have been doing more. We sometimes would have it limited to 1 on a floor at first, and then it would depend on the availability of courtroom and spacing. I have a couple other jury trial judges on my floor. I'm the only one on my side. I'm on the east or the west side of the building, so I'm the only jury trial judge on that. So it worked out pretty well. I could usually find another colleague who was happy to allow me to use the courtroom, and they do their call by Zoom, some of the chancery judges and so on.
And then when you would get a veneer together to impanel, what do you as the judge, or how would you address them to allay any fears or concerns they might have regarding their safety for a week? You tell them how long the trial's going to be, and
right.
That kind of stuff.
I would always give the potential jurors an idea of the approximate length of the trial, but the first thing they would notice when they come in the courtroom, my clerk sits behind plexiglass. I don't have plexiglass in front of me, but she sits behind plexiglass, and I will tell them, you will notice that the deputy directed you where to sit. You're all socially distant in accordance with the Center for Disease Control guidelines. Then I would tell them, and everyone would have a mask on. I would tell all the attorneys to have their masks on. And then I would say, I inform them, I would never ask jurors about their vaccination status, but I would tell them I've been vaccinated, and by the time we got the booster shot, I also got the booster shot. So I'd say I've been fully vaccinated and I've had my booster shot. I'd like to, so that you can all hear me, I'd like to, if you're comfortable with it, remove my mask when I'm addressing you. Is everyone, and I'm also a good distance from them. Is everyone comfortable? If there's anyone that's uncomfortable with that, please raise your hand and I'll keep my mask on. I never had anyone raise their hand and they'd all nod their head like, oh, sure, go ahead. And I would go through my remarks. I would never mention COVID by name because I didn't want, and I always told the attorneys, I don't want to start asking people about their vaccination status or any back and forth
Get
on
out
that.
a jail card.
Yeah, but, well, and also I think it's a personal matter where you don't want, some people think it's none of your business.
Unless you play baseball.
Yeah. But so what I would do is I would then say, if you have any concerns about, the length of the trial or being in close quarters with people, and I would also tell them that instead of using the small, I would, as I'm doing my introductions, I would introduce them to the courtroom staff and the attorneys and where everything's located. And I say, the attorney's going to be using bathrooms back here. You can use the men's room, there's a ladies' room in the hallway. You can also use the one in the jury room. But during breaks and deliberations, you're going to go to a full other courtroom so that you're not crowded. And it worked out fine.
Right, so now we're about 2.5 years out from when there was a complete shutdown to a gradual comeback. Where is our court system today regarding the duty of jury service when people get that summons in?
Well, the duty of jury service
People are all asking about, are we back to normal or
Yeah.
the new normal?
Yeah, well, but when you say the duty of jury service, I think that's an important thing. That duty has always been there. That duty, that obligation, it's a civic obligation we all have. It's also a right and a privilege. And I always tell people in my courtroom, if you're fortunate to be selected for this jury, you're going to have a sense of what. And after every trial, people always say, Judge, I'm so happy I had a chance to serve. I came down with some excuses, hoping to get excused, but you didn't buy it or whatever. And I'm actually happy I served. But so we are pretty much back to normal. What we do now, within the last several months, we had a division-wide meeting saying that we are getting away from the you need 2 courtrooms to do a jury. And it's all based on the medicine and Center for Disease Control's recommendations. I'm fortunate because I have, Judge Hennigan, for instance, is down the hall from me, he doesn't have a jury quorum. He's very agreeable unless he has to conduct something in his courtroom. He also has another courtroom he can use, either in person or Zoom, and he's been very good about allowing me to use his courtroom. I have other judges on the floor, that don't do juries. So if there's a courtroom available, I will still use the extra courtroom. I've gotten a little better of what I try and do is bring all the people into one room and do the introductions at first so I don't have to do that a second time. But now we're doing, one courtroom, one trial. And there'll be days where I'm on trial and I can look across the hall and see that Judge Slattery Boyle is, called for a jury. Or Judge Powell will be doing, so we have several juries going at the same time on the same floor.
So to summarize, you went from complete shutdown to a gradual comeback to what I'll refer to as the new normal. There's still certain precautions in place.
Yes.
When John Q. Citizen gets that summons in the mail, you told them it's their duty and their privilege and their right. You said initially when they started up, they got a very poor response. People weren't showing up and they had to send out more. How is the response now? Are people starting to respond?
Here's one of the big things they've done differently now, and it's, again, to keep traffic in the building to a minimum. In the old, prior to the pandemic, people would get a jury summons saying, appear at this courthouse on this day. A certain percentage would be will call because they want to see how many they need. Where wait until 5 o'clock and then you call and you find out if you have to show up. Now all the summons that go out are all will call, so they're not call, and they will know. So and now when I get a case assigned to me out of 2005, if it's coming to me that morning, I already know that I don't have available jurors. The only way that happens is if on occasion someone who's called for jury, the case may settle and the jurors haven't made it down to that courtroom yet, and if it does settle at the last minute, there might be available jurors. Very rare does that happen. So what they do is when I get the case, for instance, I just got a case sent to me this morning, and before I left to come film this, I asked Kenesha to call and say that we will need, and the attorneys are waiting for me, we're going to do motions this afternoon because we don't have jurors, but we're calling for 42 jurors for tomorrow morning. So when those people got their will call summonses, they're going to call this afternoon and say, yes, sorry, Mr. Durkin, you have to appear. And then they'll appear tomorrow morning in my courtroom.
So they come right to your courtroom?
No. They would go to the jury assembly room and then they would be brought to me. But they all go to the jury assembly room, but they already know Judge Lyons needs...
Judge Lyons' court.
Yeah, 2501 needs 42 jurors at 9 o'clock. And when I say 9 o'clock, we all know oftentimes, depending on when they watch the movie, they get acquainted with I always say 9 o'clock. They don't make it down to about 9:30.
Do you notice the prospective jurors being less apprehensive or using the pandemic as an excuse as time goes by?
Maybe I've just been lucky or blessed. I've done a lot of juries since the pandemic. I have not had I haven't had a mistrial because someone got sick or exposed things. I haven't had a lawyer. I've just been lucky, and I've done a lot of them. I've also been lucky, and maybe it's the way, trying to put the people at ease. I point out all the precautions that we have and the sheriff's had, and that we're recognizing social distancing, and everything we do is in accordance to the Center for Disease Control. It really hasn't been an issue. I think I had one person tell me that they were recently with someone who was exposed to COVID, but they had not been tested. I think we just excused the person, and after by agreement of all the parties or something. But I have not had an issue. What I found remarkably is that jurors seem even more anxious to serve. I mean, I think the majority of the public is happy to be out and about and doing something and interacting with other folks. And as I said before, some people come down hoping to get excused. I've seen less of that, actually. And what I've always seen consistently throughout my career as a judge and as a lawyer prior to that is that usually once they
get serve,
selected,
they
feel good about it.
Service.
Yeah, they recognize that it's an important thing. They meet a diverse group of people they never met before, and hopefully within a few hours they all come to an agreement on the case.
I want to thank you, Judge Lyons, for taking the time away from your busy schedule to do this program with us here today. As you know, this will be out on some kind of a website or YouTube or whatever for consumers, specific prospective jurors to look at and see if they get the summons, what to anticipate and expect. Do you have any further comments you'd like to make regarding the importance of jury service or your experiences? Sure. I know there was a significant backlog, so we need the jurors to show up to catch up with the backlog.
Well, I would say we're well on our way with the backlog. I can tell you this, and it's true, and I was actually kind of surprised. In December of 2021, the Law Division took more verdicts in that month, this last December, than we did. Obviously, December of 2020, we took no verdicts. December of 19, we had less cases go to verdict than we did in December of 2021, which tells me that the lawyers are anxious to get their cases moving, and the jurors are willing to, even during a very difficult time around the holidays. The one thing, and one thing I say in my courtroom to all the jurors, I say, we have a lot of rights, privileges, and freedoms in this country that sometimes those of us who are lucky enough to live here take for granted. We used to require our young men to serve in the armed forces. We now have, our entire military is made up of both men and women, and they all choose to serve their country in that fashion, which is a considerable sacrifice. What we really ask the rest of our citizens, we only ask two things. If you make enough money, you pay taxes, and if you're called upon to serve on a jury, do it. And the reason it's so important...
And vote.
Well, but that's not required. You're not required to vote. It's important, and I would encourage everyone to do that. It is part of your civic responsibility, but it's not required. You are required to, if you make enough money, pay taxes, and to serve on a jury if called to. And it's one of the things that makes our country unique and so special, and that's how we decide our disputes. And as I stated before, and I think, Al, it's probably been your experience in your many years as a lawyer, many people come down hoping to be excused because they think they have places they'd rather be. At the end of the trial, when I go and present them with a check, the final check, and I give them a certificate of service and thank them for the service, they say, "No, Judge, thank you. I came to," they were actually happy to serve, and they found it to be a fascinating thing. And the other thing I would say is anyone out there who has even a mild interest, we're trying juries all the time in the Daly Center, and the courtroom is open to the public. When I say my courtroom, it's 2501. It's not my courtroom. It belongs to the people, and the people are always welcome to come by and see what's going on. And if we get retired people on a regular basis who come down and watch trials, and they find them to be fascinating.
Very good. Thank you, Thomas Lyons. I appreciate it, and good luck with continued service to the people of Cook County.
My pleasure.